Hi people, it's Archivist here with a review for Godzilla on the PlayStation 4. Now I want to get this out of the way straight away because I need to make sure that this message really does sink in. This is not a AAA release. Despite its misleading and admittedly unfair price points, this is not what I would call a full-on game. It feels like it's really a passion project made by a group of fans who are half competent at making a game. And the result of that is something that is not entirely bad, but certainly not worth the money. I do have a slight enjoyment for this game, which I think is somewhat rooted in my love for the franchise. And admittedly, I haven't been a long-term fan. I came into it when I first heard about the 2014 film made by Gareth Edwards. And I was so excited for seeing the film because I do like giant monster movies. I'd seen Pacific Rim in 2013, I believe, and I was just so excited to see something else fairly similar. I decided, after seeing the trailers, to look into the previous movies, see what they were about, were they any good? And they were made by a studio known as Toho in Japan, and the first one came out in 1954. And it was about this giant monster, Godzilla, coming to Japan and destroying cities. And it was done using these giant monster suits with an actor inside, as opposed to stop motion, which was very popular at the time. And using practical effects, Godzilla would destroy a city. And it was quite good because you had these low-angle shots to convey a good sense of size. He would move very slowly as well. It was actually very intelligent for its time. And then after the original Godzilla, which was, I think, very well praised, and it really is, as I say, a revolutionary film for its time, you had a string of other films which became increasingly cheesier. I mean, the very next film was much cheesier than the first one, where Godzilla would fight other monsters, other kaiju, and they began to go a bit crazy with it. There were some really childish elements to some of the later films which can be really off-putting, not to mention the fact that it is a guy in a giant suit, which looks a bit ridiculous by today's standards. It was an alternative to stop motion, which was far more expensive and time-consuming, but suit acting, God, it didn't sound easy. I think the guy who was inside the Godzilla suit had a real hard time of it because it's so heavy to keep him up. It was extremely hot inside the suit, so he became dehydrated and actually passed out a few times, but he kept going. So I do have enormous respect for how those original films are made. And now we have this game, which is essentially paying homage to those original films. And if you know about those films, if you've watched those films, you're going to have a few smiles during this game because it points to certain references from those films, the ways that monsters act, the locations you go to, the way Godzilla moves. I mean, the thing is, I think where this game goes wrong, apart from seeming under budget, is that it decides to totally prioritise authenticity over gameplay. And I like authenticity, that's all well and good, but in some areas you just have to cut back a bit because it's just meaning that the game doesn't work, it's not fun. And there is no better example of this than when you fight other kaiju in this game. Now, when you fight other monsters, it really just comes down to a spam fest. It can look quite impressive, you can just see these giant monsters beating each other up, but you don't have a lot of impact because, as I say, all you can really do is mash attack buttons and occasionally use your super attack. In Godzilla's case, that's his atomic breath. And without a dedicated dodge button, but I'll move on to that a bit more, all you can really do in certain cases is get attacked over and over and over again, in some cases till you die. There was one fight I had with King Ghidorah. I was playing as King Ghidorah versus Batra, who's like this giant death moth, and he got me in this loop attack where I simply could do nothing, and I was just killed, and I just could not do anything to stop it. Very frustrating. You do have this ability to sort of become invulnerable for a short amount of time by pressing the right trigger, but you can only do this after a recharge, so it doesn't feel enormously tactical, you have to wait around a lot. Also, the way the monsters move. Think about that for a second. When Godzilla's plodding along, moving very slowly, that looks cool, it looks authentic, because that's how he moved in the films, and it looks like a giant monster going through and destroying everything. And during the first phases of a game, that's very cool, in my opinion. But once you've destroyed lots of the city and you have to go to these generators to destroy them, as that's usually the objective, and you have to walk across these destroyed wastelands, it's like, oh, just hurry up already. God, it was fun to begin with, but I am moving so slowly. But when you get down to the raw destruction, so just going around destroying buildings, on the one hand, it's extremely repetitive, and as a gameplay mechanic, it can't really be commended because it is so simplistic. But on the other hand, there is an enormous amount of catharsis to be had from just leveling buildings and seeing them explode and seeing the dust rise up as you destroy a location. For me, just using Godzilla's atomic breath to level a building is actually in itself inherently very satisfying, and I can do that over and over again and enjoy it. But it does reach a point where you just think, okay, I've done this enough, it's getting a bit boring now. And that is, for all its mistakes, that is the game's greatest weakness, is that it is repetitive. There are different game modes on offer, some where they focus on just attacking kaiju after kaiju, some where it's more about destroying the city. There's a branching campaign. I mean, just to get into the story, or little of it there is, it begins with the original 1954 attack on Japan with Godzilla, and then 60 years later you emerge from the sea and you're after this thing called G-Force, which humanity is using to power their cities, but Godzilla wants for himself to grow stronger and stronger. And that is essentially it. You have these different leaders who want to stop you. They'll send in the military to attack you, but there isn't really a story. It's more of a setup, and then you do what you do as Godzilla, you destroy things. And you don't just have to play as Godzilla, you can play as various monsters from the series. They have various attacks which are interesting to use, but I mean, they fundamentally are very similar. There's also a diorama mode, which is quite clearly fan service, where you can set up different scenarios from the films, which sounds quite cool, but really did not appeal to me. I left it after about 5 seconds of just seeing how awkward the system was to use. Graphically, the game is, I mean, you can see it for yourself, it looks very basic. And that is the thing, graphically the game is very basic, but it isn't ugly. A game looks ugly, in my opinion, when it has a low resolution, meaning it looks blurry. But in this game, everything's just extremely mediocre. And what that means is it's a very crisp, clear looking game, but what you're seeing isn't that impressive. You don't have many special effects. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It looks like it's the bare bones when it comes to visuals, but it doesn't look like it's ugly, at least on the PlayStation 4 version. That may be different on the PlayStation 3. So this is a game where, yes, there is catharsis to be had, you can enjoy it, but it is absolutely not worth the money you have to pay for it, even for a fan, to be honest. So my ultimate recommendation would be wait for a price drop, and then, even then, think, do I want this game? I wouldn't mind a sequel because I see a really good foundation here. I think the fundamentals are very enjoyable. I think there's enormous potential for this game, but they just need to do a few things. Improve the detail on the city, make kaiju fights more engaged, give the player more ability to counter attacks, and make the cities bigger. You know what? If they just started on that, that would be jet set for a much better game. So, as always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.